All right, let's go in the breakdown of Luke, and let's start off right here in chapter 1. In chapter 1, we get this intro from Luke talking about how he has this well-ordered account for Theophilus. I hope I pronounced that name right. But has researched and looked into these accounts of Jesus, and he feels convicted and feels strongly about what he is writing and what he feels and what he knows, and passes that on. And Luke is a doctor. He's an intelligent, educated individual. So it probably makes sense that Luke would want to look into this before making these kind of statements to feel confident about what he's saying, and he does. And he feels good about what he is saying and what he knows in his gospel. So he passes that on. And then in chapter 1, you'll also have the birth stories of John and Jesus. And again, Jesus' birth story in Luke is a little different than that of Matthew. And I would challenge you to kind of read both again and just see what those differences are. And again, keep in mind when you look at that, Luke has a focus on the poor and the marginalized. So his birth story of Jesus has a little more of a focus to the poor than what Matthew does, right? And so his focus affects how he tells his story. So then we'll go on to chapter 2. Chapter 2, we have Jesus being presented in the temple to Simeon, and there's kind of a little interesting part here in verse 32. Here's what it says. It says, "A light for revelation to the Gentiles and for glory to your people of Israel." Right here, Luke states that this is for the Gentiles as well as Israel, which is different than what we have probably heard from the previous Gospels. That here we get to see that Jesus, who is a Jewish man, is also here to do ministry to and with the Gentiles of that time. We also get the story of Jesus teaching in the temple as a kid, which is a pretty radical thing. Jesus would not have been, or a kid would not have really been allowed to do this, to go in the temple and speak and teach and do all this. Kids were treated much differently during that time. They are basically just a necessary thing to continue a name of the man in the house, or to help with the work on the farms, the work around anything, wherever they live. They needed males, and they need males to reproduce. And so that's how kids were just kind of looked at. They didn't have a lot of reverence and care for them like we do today. So this is a pretty radical story in the sense of what Jesus is doing. Chapter 3, we'll go to chapter 3. We get where John will get thrown in prison. Why does he have to get thrown in prison? Because it says he speaks out against Herod. How dare John speak out against Herod? And shame on any leaders that throw religious people into jail, crucify them, beat them, arrest them, hurt them, because they're simply sharing the gospel. And if that gospel challenges you as a leader or as a leader of a nation, well, that's your problem, right? I mean, they're here to share the good news, and at times it is going to rub up against us, and shame on us if we stand by and allow the powers to silence these voices. It's what people did to Jesus. It's what people's done to John. Right? This has gone on to the disciples and gone on forever. And it's where, this is something we can look at today and go, we gotta have a little courage to protect people who are out there, speaking about the gospel. Because what's John sharing that's so crazy and so dangerous? What's he say? He says, hey, don't extort money from people. Don't lie about people. Don't take more than you need to take. Share with others when you have something to share. How is that some radical, awful teaching? It's not, right? This is not. This is how we bring kingdom come. This is what Jesus is asking us to do. But for those in power that want to hold on to that and wealth and hold on to that, this would have really rubbed them the wrong way. And so I would say for us, if it rubs us the wrong way, well, maybe we do need to have a little pause and a little introspection for ourselves to see if we're living out some of these ideals and values that John and Jesus both preach about. So it's a challenging part of the story. We go to chapter 4. This is where Jesus starts his ministry. You get the temptation in the desert. You also get this part where Jesus reads the scroll in the synagogue. What's interesting about this, it means that Jesus could read Hebrew. And he could also speak Aramaic, right? There's even thoughts that Jesus knows Greek. So Jesus is obviously intelligent. He knows how to speak through different languages, which isn't really shocking. He is Jesus. He should be able to communicate, I would hope, with multiple people. But this shows it took somebody pretty special to read the scrolls. That's why they're kind of like amazed, like, oh my gosh, like what, like this is the dude, like, isn't he just the carpenter's son, you know? And it's like, yeah, but how can he do that? Like, because that's a big deal in that time. Today, we don't look at like being able to read, scripture is a big deal. In that time, that's a huge deal. So definitely would have blown people away, and definitely would have got people asking questions. Who is he? I mean, I can't believe that he's out here doing this. I just remember him being the carpenter's son, right? And this is where his hometown rejects him. I mean, they want to kill him. They want to throw him off a cliff, right? They're not happy about who he is, and you shouldn't be here telling us these stuff. You're just this guy. And sometimes we do that. Sometimes we miss the prophets in our midst because maybe they grew up around us and we know some icky, sticky stuff about them, and we tend to ignore their voices, but maybe they've been transformed. Maybe they've had an encounter. Maybe their voices are worth listening to. So it should be a challenge to us to pay attention to those that have been around and to really listen to the words they're saying and not be so focused on who we remember them as. We'll skip chapter 5. We'll go into chapter 6. It's where Jesus calls his disciples. What's interesting is he called all of his disciples together, and out of all those disciples, he picks 12. He picks his 12 people that are going to be his main 12. So obviously there's more disciples and more people around him. And then you get this thing of blessings and woes, and I kind of like this section. And my question for you all is to think about, like, what do you feel? What do you think when you read this section of chapter 6? Who do you imagine in today's time that Jesus would be talking about or to? Because this blessing and woes can be a challenging thing. So it's a good way for us to try to maybe pull it forward in today's time. Who would Jesus be speaking about? In verse 37, Jesus talks about not judging, not condemning, and forgiving people, right? What's interesting is he talks about that we have to do these things first, right? If you judge, you'll be judged. If you condemn, you will be condemned. If you forgive, you will be forgiven. A lot of times we'll say, well, I'll give respect if people give me respect first, right? I'll forgive if somebody forgives me, I mean, oh, they're condemning me, I'm going to condemn them. No. That's not what Jesus is saying it's okay to do. What Jesus says is we practice forgiveness. We don't condemn. We don't judge. We can't control what other people's reactions are to us. What we can only do is really control our own actions. And so this puts a responsibility on us to step up regardless of how somebody else may be treating us, saying things to us, right? There's a higher push from Jesus in our ethic and our standards and how we interact with people. And for us to receive that same forgiveness and that same love and that back, well, we have to give it away first. So that's something really, really important for us to remember. Chapter 7, we'll move on to chapter 7. Interesting part here is when Jesus tells John's followers to report what they have witnessed that's happening. And blessed are those who take no offense to what he is doing, right? Blessed are those who take no offense to what he is doing, right? Sometimes we share a message of Jesus. We share Jesus's words. We see this in the evangelical church a little bit right now, that they just think Jesus's words, they're not getting us anywhere, right? Like it's kind of like these words, they sound great, but we're not really going to follow them. The Southern Baptist Convention itself has felt that Jesus is too woke, that the Sermon on the Mount is too woke, and they don't want to hear that kind of talk anymore, right? Blessed are those who take no offense, right? So we have to take Jesus's words seriously. We have to remove our own emotional reaction to them. If we're feeling called out, well, maybe that's good for us. Maybe that should convict us at times. And we should probably sit in prayer and contemplation about Jesus's words. So we can live his challenge and his words and his ministry out better. So this is one I look at in today's time, and there's a lot of people that get offended when we preach Jesus. And Jesus is saying, man, blessed are those who take no offense to what I do and what I share. All right. Then you move on to the story of the sinful woman, right? And this is an example, I think, of some real hospitality the woman is showing Jesus, right? The Pharisee invites Jesus to his house, but doesn't really make him feel welcome, but the woman does. And the Pharisee is calling out this woman to Jesus, like how can you interact, let this woman touch you, do you know who she, like, she's an awful woman, she is nasty, she is sinful, right? Why, like, how can you do that? Well, what's Jesus, well, and she gave me a kiss when you didn't, you didn't wash my feet, she did, she anointed my head, you didn't. Like, she has provided really kind of a radical welcome for Jesus and recognizes who he is. And really it's kind of a lovely story knowing that, hey, Jesus sees through sometimes of our missteps, our misdeeds, our actions where we haven't been at our best, and realizes and looks deep into our heart and can really see, are we faithful? Are we loving? This Pharisee, why maybe they behaved in a very non-sinful way. Maybe they followed everything to the letter of the law. Internally, they were kind of missing that love, that welcome and that hospitality that Jesus is asking of us. So it's more than just checking the boxes and doing the right things, right? By the law, it's this greater push to be more, and that's kind of the challenge we get here in this story. We go to chapter 8. We have where Jesus says his mother and brothers are the ones who hear the word of God and do it, right? Hey, your mom and brothers are outside. Jesus like, well, my mother and my brothers are the ones who hear the word and do it. They're concerned. They're not super happy with what they're hearing from Jesus, what he's preaching, what he's doing. And so there's this kind of disbelief in him. And Jesus is like, yeah, I mean, if you're not going to believe, not going to support, not going to back me up, man, my brothers and sisters are the ones, and my mothers are the ones that do this, so that support and also go out and live out my words and my challenge. And so, again, that's kind of it's a tough passage, and I would be curious, like, what do you think more about that? Like, what do you think more about those words of Jesus and just kind of how he dismisses his family in this moment? It's a tough one, and it's one that we may feel a little bit in today's world. We'll skip 9. We'll go on to chapter 10. Jesus sends out the 72 to preach ahead of him to the areas that he's going to go. So here we see this expansive group of disciples. Some of these disciples did include women. And so that he has quite a bit of disciples at his disposal doing the work and helping him to do the ministry. And then you get this parable of the Good Samaritan, a great parable, popular one, famous one. But this is a pretty radical teaching. It's a little radical because Samaritans and Jewish people didn't get along in that time. So to tell this story to Jewish individuals, and that the Samaritan is your neighbor, and to lift the Samaritan up in the face of others would have been a little, to the people. But Jesus is trying to make a really strong point that these are our neighbors. Even the people that you don't agree with, even the people that really drive you crazy, even the people that you dislike are still your neighbors. And it's a great challenge for us today of who is our neighbor. I mean, think of the people that you struggle with. Think of the people that you really have a hard time with. That is your neighbor. That's your neighbor. And so we have to kind of remember that at times, that our neighbors aren't always our favorite people, and that Jesus still calls us to care for them as well when they need help and when we can offer help. So it's a radical kind of hospitality, a radical love that Jesus is pushing us to in the Gospel of Luke. Chapter 11, we'll move on to chapter 11. You get this powerful moment in the Pharisees' house where Jesus is calling them out as well as the experts of the law and their hypocrisy. This is another public display of Jesus really just challenging these individuals to be better than just law followers. That there is more care that they need to be doing. That they're missing the heart of what they're doing, and so Jesus really brings some hammering here to these people, and it's probably super challenging. You can see maybe why they get frustrated and upset with him, but Jesus isn't wrong, is he? I mean, is Jesus wrong in this? And so, where do we maybe see this in our world? Do we have the courage to, in a way, call some people out? Now, granted, we're not Jesus, so we do need to be somewhat careful with that. But could we offer some Christian kind of correction when we see people really being hypocrites in some very harmful ways? I think we have a reasonable opportunity or a reasonable why we can do that, why it's okay for us to do that, but to do it in a way that's still merciful and grace filled to people, to help us to slow down and to interact better with others. So if we're seeing people with a lot of hypocrisy and just really, behaving in certain ways, and why aren't you doing that? You should be doing, I've run into some people like that where, they come to church every Sunday, they do this stuff, but there's some real hate in that heart, or that heart just doesn't want to care well for people. And we can find ways to kind of approach that and call that out in gentle ways that maybe can bring transformation to people, because it's this that Jesus wants to see softened up. We don't want the hardened heart like the Pharaoh. We don't want the hardened heart that prevents us from accepting and doing community with all sorts of people. And we'll move on to chapter 12 to end here in our reading for this week. In verse 48, Jesus says, "From everyone to whom much has been given, much will be required. And from the one to whom much has been entrusted, even more will be demanded." Right? This is a powerful verse, right? And so sometimes we knock down, or we may talk in certain ways about rich people or wealthy people. There is a challenge to those people. People like myself, I do better financially than the majority of people in this world. There is a certain demand, a certain expectation that Jesus has for us in how we share what we have, to help people to have enough, to have a place to lay their head, to have enough food for their stomachs, clothes on their back. Right, just some of the basic needs, just to get through life, to help them to live a fuller life, a life that God has created us for. Right? We can bust our hump and achieve great things, but there is still, according to Jesus, there is still this kind of commandment and this push for us to share what we have with others, to not just hoard it for our own good, but to share that, and that is a way we can bring kingdom come to this place and to our communities and to our little spot in this world during this time. So hope you enjoy the first 12 chapters of Luke, and I hope this helps guide your reading and gets you thinking a little deeper as you read these passages and chapters. Luke's a wonderful gospel, and we will continue through the rest of Luke in our next video.